Welcome to the Bookshop eventcast. This is episode 1, and it's a recording of an event that took place on Thursday, the 7th of May. It is the launch of the Aberystwyth MA anthology for 2015 called Wales Within. The creative writing department invites the master's students to create an anthology where they can submit work, but are encouraged to invite members of the public as well to submit work in order to be published. Who you're about to be able to hear, you'll hear Katherine Stansfield, Keeley Laufer, Michael Dante, Mary Jacobs, Leonie Campbell, Elizabeth Lee, Victoria David, Nicole De Ponte, Kiran Sharma, Emma Musty, Jack William Rendell, Mary Ellis Dunning, and George Sandifer-Smith. So without further ado, the first reader is Katherine Stansfield.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the team for asking me to read this evening. It's always a great honour, and the theme of the anthology, Wales Within, just chimes perfectly with the poems that I'm working on at the moment, so I was really pleased. So I'm going to read first a poem that I've got in the anthology, which I'm delighted is there. It's called First Welsh Class. It has taken me 12 years to reach this room in the Penparcau Community Centre. 12 years of walking the short road from my house and ignoring the open door, the beckoning hand. 12 years of being deafened by my own tongue's noise. You won't believe the things I've stuffed in my ears to keep the sounds from slipping inside and burrowing down to my mouth where they could stumble out and I wouldn't know my own voice, wouldn't know myself. This is my last confession and penance. I'll learn the 58 ways to say yes in Welsh. So I'm working on my second book of poems at the moment, and those are some of the poems that I'm reading tonight, and I'm reading them for the first time ever, so I really hope you like them. Tell me if you don't. And the themes of the second collection are all about living in Wales, but not being Welsh, or am I Welsh, or all those kind of questions of identity and where you're from and where you live and where you're going, and of course living here language is inherently bound up with that. So as well as documenting my experiences of learning Welsh in a formal sense in a classroom, I'm also really interested in the ways in which your voice can change the longer you live in a place, and when you hear sounds produced in a different way than you're used to, and how your ear and your tongue kind of changes. So this poem kind of plays around with those ideas and looks at the different ways to say a particular word. So the poem is called This Kryptonite is Friendly. The point I know something has changed is when I say Lois Lane instead of Lois. I try again. They're alive. Clark Kent is friends with Lois Lane. Lois Lane doesn't know that Clark is Superman. You say, that isn't right. But I can't make my mouth go back to Lois. It will only say Lois. It's like there's kryptonite between my ears, my eyes, my lips. Not the kind that makes Superman roll about and gnash his teeth. This kryptonite is friendly, though it crept up on me. You don't believe in friendly kryptonite. You say, perhaps the wind changed and my mouth got stuck. You say, perhaps it will change back. I know it won't. This thing goes deep, has taken root. And the last poem I'm going to read is in the new edition of Planet, I'm pleased to say. It's called Against Blood, and it has as its epigraph a line from a news article that appeared on the BBC Online in September last year. And the line reads, "A cutting-edge DNA test could determine how Welsh you are." To say that this is the way you decide who I am and who I'm not. My sample of body that speaks only couplings and accidents, emigration and abandonments, Scotland and Ireland, Buffalo and back. To say that this is the way you sanction my belonging and my not, like those wet days at school that kept us penned in the hall, the Cornish kids playing genealogy games all through break, and his father, and his father. To say that this is the way you prove what's home and what's not, that identity is a permanent code you can map in a lab when a swab can't show all the timid love I have. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you.
Next up is Keeley Laufer, who is an undergraduate student at Aberystwyth. Medieval Day in Cardigan. A trumpet is called to play for Castell Abertafi's Medieval Day, with its performer dressed in adult-sized princess frock, mock velvet, gold piping acrylic. One size fits all pushed too far, seams burst at the bum, ripped pinned shut with safety clips, jeans to safely reinstate 1166, the first Eisteddfod of Wales. Borne on tractor back, the trumpet is driven downtown on a stalling engine that forces and jerks one hand to hold onto the rail, making the trumpet hand shake involuntarily. Unsettling the trumpet's valves, past every few shops and shocked, the trumpet hiccups Canonlan and Myfanwy off the side and around a roundabout. Prian, Dick Jones's daughter, introduced the accordion to a train of schoolboy monks singing from within their mud-stained clothes, clinging to tonalities from within their habit. Next is Michael Dante, reading Hinterland.
Yeah, I went for a walk in Bath Bog as I live near there, and it was like this fabulous sunset, and so it started making me think of the mythological landscape of Wales. And I wrote a series of poems, and there's 3 of them here. As of yet, the series is unfinished, and they're 3 sonnets. 1, Idris. The heart almost stops with it, the black church silhouetted against the golden sky, as though it were a Gothic cutout. I watch the winter pool in the ditches, and the dreamy mist is but a pink wisp spun around the bulrushes. Here the air whispers to the salt marshes, and Idris the stargazer rains down fire from his chair into the bog, where the feathered tips of long grasses burn like arrows in the breeze. To the left of me a ram grazes, his dipped fleece lighter than the best ivory, a newly lit lamp marking the fenland, and a stain bleeds down his back like a wound. Llewellyn's land. The sun blinds me, pushing a red iron rod in my eye, fills my skull with December's flame. And old Idris looks down from his stronghold at this hinterland. Here I am alone with the myths of this magical kingdom. Nearby a mountain pony snorts, chomping a mouthful of cotton sedge, and lapwings wade on the mirrored edge of the swamp. I catch the song of the skylark, uttered from the heart of the thorn bush. Soon the red tip of the sun will sink out of sight, turning the ocean to ash. Below the lowlands, Llewellyn's fighters lay mummified in the salt marshes. Cause fuck no, I am on the edge of the great marshland, known as Bath Bog. The bushes claw the sky, half-embalmed fingers poking through the land like the peach-stained hands of my ancestors. I walk under the heavens, the firmament illuminated under the kindling of clouds. It seems such flaming swirls are lit by a filament fashioned from kingly wool, as though the Lamb of God were molting from the sky. Meanwhile the dusk falls gently over the foothills, and the great salt marsh is burning with being I can scarcely describe. God's Fockno is under a spell, for sky, water and land shine like 3 jewels. Thank you.
It's Daniel Abbott. Okay, so next up it's Mary Jacob with her poetry.
I'm going to read 2 poems, and I think it's worth saying that there's a Wednesday poetry group that meets in the Arts Centre, and the books, it's a waterfall of books here, and it's been a very supportive and stimulating group, and so everybody, I think you should keep an eye out for the Wednesday poetry group. So some of these have been workshopped in the Wednesday group. This first poem is called Little Box. A record of her thinking, paths across gray shingle beach, red jacket, red trousers, red hat. Draw, her eye to sea etchings in slate, a poem in red binding. And the second poem is dedicated really to someone who used to work. Well, there were two tragedies in the Arts Centre, really. And I knew Paul Davis. I didn't really know Liam, but these happened quite close together. And so one day walking down the hill, I had this feeling about that. And so this turned into a poem called Mackerel Sky. Your fingertips stretch to scrape through clouds, stop the wind, cradle the scent of begonias to our faces. We walk down to the sea. The warm air and cold air press their palms together, raise the skirting of sky, revealing salmon and peach. Silhouette trees stand against silvered plate, pose for a photo, while you reach from one horizon to the other, trailing foam. We are engulfed momentarily. The sea congeals, the sun plays statues. Only hours ago you slithered out of your skin. Now you've almost evaporated. Yet you embrace us. We inhaled you, mouth to mouth, thinking you were just drinking water, not drowning.
Is Leonie Campbell.
I have 2 poems for you. The first one is Pebbles. It's kind of, whenever I'm in Worcester or the Midlands, I kind of tend to look for Wales for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure why. It might be because I've been here for so long. But, yeah, anyway. Outside of Wales, I search for colour in a dull shale grey city. For seagulls pulling rubbish from bins or chips from pedestrians. For the bicycles breeding beside plain beige terraces or tucked around ugly park sculptures. I search for blossom, for pavements plastered in vodka bile, stepped into, staggered out of, and leaving a trail. The din of a jazz band ballooning in a too small pub with good beer and mismatched chairs. I search for clean horizontal rain, roof tiles snatched by wind, uprooted trees spat out by the sea. So I stand downwind the lapping foggy murmur of the shore in an underpass, reeking of piss. As a pebble landed home in cool, salt air. Okay, and my other one is a little shorter. It's also a mile away from the first one, but I'm not going to blame the management. And this one is called Aberystwyth. Looking at her in the fog and being felt out beneath the blue and purple lights, beside the clattering of drinks and shoes, we sink into the sofa depths, known by others like us, but not us. And you are like rain in my hands. Thank you very much.
Next up is Elizabeth Lee.
sublime to the ridiculous. If you're feeling hungry, my family say to me, you only ever think about food, Mum. So there you go, true to type. Aber, good enough too. The sea is mocha with whisked foam, patterned with chantilly cream. The starling specks as numerous as currants in a Aberystwyth. Beach groins are standing chocolate flakes. The castle a badly broken loaf. Old College a plate of fairy cakes. Inland from the cowl of Borthbog are mountains of pistachio ice cream topped with marshmallow. Consume over 3 years or more and you will grow tall. One haiku. Haikus aren't supposed to have headings, but I can't cope without them, so this is called Focus. From trains, sea vistas, dovey mountain reflections, students stare at screens.
Next we have our very own Vicky, and she'll read her poem.
Hi, my poem is called Hiraeth, and it's about my dad and how he constantly talks about how he has to come back to Wales. A longing for a route to hook a life on, a pillar, Herculanean, grey wacky, a thinker in thought on the promenade curve, good Welsh air, digs deep into his great Welsh lung like a fire bellow. He memorises a horizon, remembers another that he escaped, they merge like watercolour, studded with copper silt, a steel plate warping under a sterling disc. An epiphany burnishes. It oxidises in the dip. We should move back to Wales, shouldn't we? It crystallises in the salted breeze. The dragon's flag flaps, rattles, and agrees. Next is Nicole.
This one is my particular favorite of the ones that I submitted, and it's called Between Storms. And after a storm I went out for a run, and I was looking down at the pebbles and thinking about sort of the idea of fate, of a storm kind of picking them up and throwing them onto the shore. And it made me think of all the people here who were sort of chucked up by a storm in their lives and then chucked back into the ocean again. So, like smooth round pebbles, the sea sends them, haphazardly tossed onto the paths and lanes. They form their own irregular patterns, thrown together in ways they could not have foreseen. Each stone has its own story, told in the texture the ocean has written into its soul. And now a trick of a storm has briefly spun these lives together. There is no telling how the journey will change them before they are flung back to the sea once more. And, This one, I think, is very much the student experience of when you wake up and your alarm is telling you you should be awake, but you would rather not be awake. And it's called Before Waking. Morning tickles your nose 60 seconds before the insistent beep troubles you to set your feet on the ground. But it is too warm in this nest, as if all night long you have hugged to yourself every happy thought, and now you are all wrapped up and reluctant to face all the impossible things on today's menu of busy everythings. In this moment, you hang between the past and the present, between all the loveliness of safety and warmth and dreams in that just right spot, and all the uncertainty of the day ahead. And the last one was one I was thinking about because I'm really scared to share my writing with other people. And it's scary when you sort of begin. That empty page is very terrifying. So this is called Empty Pages. The bravest moment is to begin, for then no intention can save you. There is no safe retreat. Your greatest fear is upon the blank, perilous page. It's on the hand unsure and hesitant. Before the closed door, we might wish for retreat. Anything but that one terrifying leap.
all relate to that one. Next up, we've got Kiran Sharma.
To Ellis. Shadowed by the nun who wrecked the garden, shouldered by a flood tide, weightless upon water, wavering around seal echo, demurring the friendly colony. Shivering over sea pinks, up an ankle rocky path, flecking through the buttergrass, ushered by a flapping kite, vanishing into violet, at Skyline's passage, to Ellis.
Okay, and next is Emma Musty. Yes, there we go.
Hello, humans. Now I'm going to get told off probably by Kath for pronouncing this wrong because I titled it in Welsh. It's called Moingala. Can you tell me what that means?
No, but I'm sure somebody will know.
Morning?
In morning.
In morning.
Navgala.
Yes, good. Okay, I checked that with my Welsh friends. Very good. Okay. Yesterday, my twin sister died in Bethlehem. I repeat it again. I think of the little donkey. I think about last Christmas and the matching presents we brought each other. I think of donkeys. We shared this Cardiff flat until 2 months ago. Her hair clips are still on the side in the bathroom. Her shoes are at the door. I found her bobble hat under a cushion on the sofa. I tried to make a cup of tea, but her favourite mug is on the shelf. I make a roll-up with shaking hands, but there is no lighter. In my head, I blame her instantly. And then I remember again. In the bathroom, I am sick, and as I wipe the saliva from my mouth, I look at my sister in the mirror staring back at me. I try to stay very still. I tilt my head slightly. I still can't see it. I still can't see the loss of her. And like all those actors in all those films, I wonder why I didn't know it without being told. She is my identical twin. She is quite literally a part of me. Yet I drank a mojito in Milky. I go outside to see if it's true, to test the theory of her passing on the streets she walked. It's raining, that light rain that makes you unpleasantly damp. I think of the pictures of the West Bank, how dry it is. I wonder what it feels like to breathe there. Here, today, breathing feels like drowning. She was volunteering, teaching English in refugee camps and local schools. She sent emails every week. She knew it could be dangerous, but she wasn't worried. She didn't believe that it would ever be her in those news reports about other people's politics and other people's freedom. I stand at Death Junction and think, as I do every time, of the last man that was hung there, of how pointless his death was, and yet how necessary. It marked the end. I can't walk down City Road, I can't pass Milgie's. I head up Albany. The slate and tarmac gleam in imitation of the sky. It always looks like this when it rains, always does this trick of turning the world upside down. Nothing has changed. She is not dead in Wales. My feet carry me to the wreck, and I look at the muddy, litter-strewn grass of the playing field, and I remember when it was sunny. I remember the picnics and the thick boys kicking a ball around. I remember laughing till we cried. I cross right through the middle, getting mud on my trainers. I sit on a bench on the far side and stare at my hands. They are not quite her hands. I broke my little finger when we were kids. There is a slight kink in it. I do not realise I am crying until a man walks up to me. He has a half-drunk bottle of pinkish Lambrini. He offers it to me and I drink. He is from Nigeria, and his first name is also the name of a famous European city. His father has died, but he is not crying. His father is not dead in Wales. He tells me a story about oil and theft, of his mother's garden, and how she never thought to blame her neighbours for taking her fruit, of how she sits alone in the long nights now with a gun at her side. He tells me about torture and escape and the dreams he has to go back and change it all. He believes in this. He believes that things can still change for the better. I tell him about growing up on the posh side of a council estate in Ely, about crashing my bike and breaking my little finger, about my sister and I buying each other the same Christmas presents, even when we tried not to. I tell him how we laughed until we cried. We sit in silence for a while, mourning and not mourning, living and not living. I look at this narrow strip of land stuck between car-lined streets and leafless trees. Suddenly it seems too small to breathe in. I feel a pressure on my ribs from the constriction of it, the tightening. My friend nods at me and smiles gently. He understands. He pulls out 2 cigarettes and lights them both, handing one to me. I inhale deeply and lean back on the bench, tilting my neck to rest my head. Above me, autumn trees drip, and I remember them green.
And finally, Jack William Rendell.
Hello. I'm a English and creative writing student at the university, and this poem was actually one I read in one of my first workshops, and now it's bizarrely published in a book. So, well, it's about my hometown, Barmouth, which is, as you can see, I've spread my wings quite a long way. And for me, Wales Within really brought up the ideas of the community coming out in winter when all the tourists have gone away in the summer. So this is unseen by most. From my home of bricks and mortar, I see the line that marks seawater. So sharp you'd think it's cut by knife, a constant there throughout my life. I stroll the sand in February and find the beach now speaks to me. A strip of perfect sand, that's me, with marron grass right by the sea. I've golden dunes baked in the sun, where people need the sand for fun. Despite this, I don't mean to boast. I'm currently unseen by most. From May to August, I'm well used, the place where sea and sand are fused. I'm filled with windbreaks, tents and skin, which litter me and wear me thin. Though in the summer sun I roast, in winter I'm unseen by most. When comes September, they've all gone, and crowds of people turn to one. He walks his poodle through the dunes, in solitude he whistles tunes, the rest inside. Though at the coast, they leave me now, unseen by most. Yes, even so-called regulars, they shun me now, and stay in bars. And when they end their holiday, the children never come to play. And any man floats like a ghost right past me. I'm unseen by most. Its voice just carries on the wind, and somehow makes me feel I've sinned. I look at beach and see grey-blue, within our Wales, well known by few. But though lamenting cries still come, the beach forgets, it's seen by some. Thank you.
And last but not least, Mary.
I wasn't planning on reading. Okay, so this is a story I wrote for my portfolio last term, and it's just a chunk of that story. So it's about a woman living in 17th century Wales who is a bit odd. The rat's fat tail trailed after it like dragging intestines as it scurried across the skirting board and disappeared behind the cupboard. Alice could still hear its sharp little claws picking at the floorboards, but she knew that if she were to look for it later, it would have disappeared into the wall, nestling itself into the hollows of the house.
It would stay there until the urge for food drove it through the cavities in search of crumbs. Alice would know when this was, because she, too, would feel the emptiness of the rat's stomach in her own, the grumbling protests of internal acid. 3 short raps on the front door jolted Alice from her trance, drawing her eyes away from the heavy dark cabinet where the rat had disappeared and fixing them instead on the front door. Through the thick pane of wood, she knew that there were 2 souls there. She could feel their warmth. She could feel their anxiety. She could take a good guess at their identities based on the gnawing questions she sensed in their minds. Alice Bach, you have to help us, hurried words poured from Mrs. Gwenllian Ellis as soon as she'd stepped over the threshold and into Alice's living area. It's been so long now, her husband began quietly. We are very concerned. John does not think the herbs are working properly. John Ellis shifted, his feet pawing the ground, his eyes fixed downwards. I'm not discounting. Alice cut them off with a sharp look. You must stop worrying, she told them. It is not good for the baby. Both man and wife looked up at her, wide-eyed, then turned to each other. Alice smiled at them and said, You are carrying a child, Gwenllian. Soon after her neighbours' success with their longed-for conception, Alice began to feel stirrings in her own womb. She grew tired and sick. Her breasts became tender. Her monthly bleed stopped. She longed to hear the fresh cat's breath cry of an infant, longed to hold it to her breast and comfort it, but it was impossible. Alice had not spent time with a man in many moons, and despite her body's trickery, she knew with certainty that she was not carrying a child of her own. Had she been, it would have spoken to her, would have called out to her. She would have seen it, embedded there in her own flesh like a kindling ember, just as she had seen Mr. and Mrs. Ellis's baby, just as she had seen last time. She did not, however, cease dreaming of infantile cries, of tiny limbs and soft, supple hairs sprouting from a vulnerable head like thistledown. One night in early autumn, she dreamed of him again. Her limbs were moving outwards and inwards like the tide. She moved like the water of the river that ran beneath Dolyhirion Bridge not far from her home, the bridge she walked over daily. She was moving so quickly that the shrubbery all around was only a blurred mass of greens and browns. She'd never danced like this before, but she was happy now, the thrill of each step sending a current through her, pushing her forward, spinning her body around and around uncontrollably. She heard her own laugh echoing in the trees, heard the birds chirping back at her. As she moved more swiftly into the dense undergrowth of the forest, the trees grew closer together, knotted and gnarled like withered old men. She couldn't see the way back, but she didn't need to. Pathways were unnecessary to her now. She knew she could fly home if she wanted to. She knew she would be able to hover over the trees, to stare upwards or downwards and glide quickly towards home, back to her own sleeping body beneath the Dornick's bedding. As if the thought had lifted her, her feet swept upwards from the ground, and she span and danced mid-air now, whizzing along like a fallen leaf carried in the breeze. Rogue branches tried to grab and claw at her, but she reached a clearing with only a small tear in her cloth dress. He was stood there, dead centre, surrounded by huge trees which blocked even the sky from view. It was dark. She moved towards him, her feet back on the ground now, and listened to his pull. His pull. She could feel it in her shoulders, her calves, her thighs. When she reached him,